Inside ADX Florence, America's most secure prison. The cage within the Rockies. They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Hidden deep in the barren plains of Colorado, surrounded by jagged mountains and silence so heavy it hums, stands a fortress unlike any other on Earth, the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, better known as ADX Florence. From the outside, it looks less like a prison and more like a bunker built for the apocalypse, endless concrete, razor wire, and guard towers that seem to watch the horizon rather than the inmates. But the real control isn't outside. It's buried deep inside those walls, in cells so silent, so isolated, that time itself feels like punishment. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, ADX was designed for the worst of the worst, inmates who proved too violent, too cunning, or too notorious to be held anywhere else. Its official purpose, to control those who cannot be controlled. Inside, men live in concrete boxes, 7 feet wide, 12 feet long. They spend 23 hours a day alone. Their meals slide through a slot in the door. Their only human voices are orders, echoing through the intercom. One former warden once said, "You're not just locked in a cell here, you're locked inside your own mind." When ADX opened in 1994, it was born out of blood. The U.S. prison system had been shaken by violent uprisings, from the 1980s riots at USP Marion to stabbings and hostage-takings across high-security facilities. Marion had been the nation's most secure prison, but after 2 guards were murdered in 1983 by members of the Aryan Brotherhood, the Bureau of Prisons decided something stricter, colder, and more absolute was needed. That something became ADX Florence. According to court filings and Bureau of Prisons data, it was built with 37 acres of concrete precision, costing nearly $60 million, a price tag that bought perfection in control. Every door, every corridor, every light was engineered to eliminate risk, movement, or rebellion. The design is mathematical. Angles prevent prisoners from seeing beyond the next wall. Cells are positioned so that no inmate can make eye contact with another. Even exercise yards are isolated concrete pens, known by inmates as dog runs. A former inmate once described it to the New York Times. You never touch another human. You never see the sky without bars. The inmates who arrive here often come by air, aboard the infamous Con Air, the federal transfer jet that lands under heavy guard at a small Colorado airstrip. Shackled head to toe, they're escorted in armored vehicles through Florence's quiet town before disappearing behind the high fences of ADX. Locals barely notice anymore, they're used to the rumble of convoys and the sight of federal marshals. But to the men inside, that drive marks the last time they'll see open land. Among those who've called ADX home are some of America's most notorious figures, cartel kingpins, domestic terrorists, espionage agents, and serial killers. The public record confirms names like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, Ramzi Youssef, architect of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and Richard Reed, the British shoe bomber. Others include cartel enforcer Juan Garcia Abrego, mob hitmen, and convicted spies. Each one confined to the same rules: silence, solitude, and surveillance. Inmates call ADX the clean version of hell. Here, violence isn't fought with guards, it's replaced by architecture. The walls are thick, the air tight, and the routines unbreakable. Lights turn on automatically at 5 a.m. and never go fully dark. Cameras see everything. Even showers are controlled by timers and locks. Breakfast comes at 6:30 a.m., a plastic tray slid through a slot. Oatmeal, milk, maybe an apple. Lunch at 10:30. Dinner by 4. Every movement, even a step, requires permission. They exercise alone, in a small concrete cage with a narrow slit to the sky. There's no grass. No dirt. Just gray. Most prisoners go years without shaking a hand, hearing laughter, or seeing beyond the cement horizon. But ADX wasn't just built for punishment. According to Bureau of Prisons officials, it was meant to restore order, to show that even chaos had limits. The philosophy was simple: total control prevents total violence. Yet reports and lawsuits over the decades have told another story, one of mental breakdowns, hallucinations, and suicides behind those steel doors. Inmates pounding on walls just to prove they're still alive. Voices echoing through vents like distant cries. Guards walking past, pretending not to hear. A 2012 class action lawsuit, Bacote vs. Federal Bureau of Prisons, accused ADX of neglecting mentally ill prisoners, locking them in isolation instead of treatment. According to court filings, some inmates screamed for days, smeared messages in blood, or begged for death. The Bureau later settled, agreeing to mental health reforms. But for many who've been there, reform means little. Once the door shuts, ADX doesn't just confine, it erases. One retired guard, speaking anonymously to the Denver Post, described the emotional toll. You think you're guarding monsters, but after years, you realize, the place turns everyone into one. Even the staff. In this world, silence becomes its own kind of violence. Inmates learn to survive not through strength, but through surrender, adapting to a life where control is both weapon and wound. Every day, they wait for the same sound, the metal click of the food slot, the only proof the world still remembers them. And somewhere beyond those walls, mountains rise, untouched, silent, watching the ghosts of men who will never see them again. According to court records and multiple news reports, ADX Florence continues to operate as the highest security federal prison in the United States. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, have repeatedly questioned its use of long-term solitary confinement. But the Bureau of Prisons maintains its stance: ADX is a necessary tool to ensure the safety of staff, inmates, and the public. In the heart of Colorado's desert silence, the truth lies buried in concrete, where every sound is a whisper, and every whisper is a reminder of the cost of absolute control. Disclaimer. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. All names, places, and details are drawn from verified public sources including federal court filings, Bureau of Prisons records, and credible news reports. Some descriptions have been modified for narrative clarity and privacy. The arrival: how inmates enter the supermax system. The road to ADX Florence doesn't begin in Colorado. It begins with a decision, made far away, in some sealed federal office, where officials from the Bureau of Prisons quietly decide that a man has crossed an invisible line. Not a line of guilt, he's already convicted. A line of control. When an inmate proves too violent, too influential, or too unpredictable for any other prison, his name is whispered into a special classification meeting. Files are reviewed. Incident reports read aloud. Guard statements replayed. And if the pattern fits, the inmate is referred for administrative transfer to USP Florence ADX. It's not a sentence from a judge. It's a sentence from the system. According to Bureau of Prisons documents, the process is called Special Management Referral. It requires multiple levels of approval. The inmate's disciplinary record, psychological profile, and security threat group affiliations, every fight, every coded note, every rumor of escape, are weighed against one simple question. Can this man be safely housed anywhere else? If the answer is no, a new file is stamped with 3 letters that change everything: ADX. The transfer is secretive. No warning. No goodbye. One morning, the inmate's cell door opens. 2 guards stand there, flanked by a lieutenant in a black vest. He's ordered to cuff up hands, waist, and feet, then wrapped in chains until he moves like a machine. His property is packed and sealed. His name removed from the housing log. By the time the other inmates realize he's gone, he's already on the highway, heading toward an airport few outsiders know exists. The flight is called the Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, known among inmates as Con Air. It operates under the U.S. Marshal Service, ferrying prisoners across the country under maximum security. The plane's seats are narrow, bolted steel. The windows blacked out. Guards line the aisles with tasers and rifles. On board, men from every corner of the federal system sit shackled together, cartel lieutenants beside hackers, spies beside gang enforcers, all heading somewhere, but not the same place. One by one, names are called and destinations read. For the man bound for Florence, Colorado, the words hit like a verdict. ADX designation confirmed. He knows what it means. Everyone does. It's the end of the line, the place even killers fear. The descent into Colorado feels like falling into another world. From above, the Rocky Mountains stretch like jagged scars. The plane lands at Pueblo Memorial Airport, about an hour south of Colorado Springs. A motorcade of armored vehicles waits on the tarmac, engines humming, sirens off. Local residents barely glance anymore. They've seen it before, unmarked convoys escorted by black SUVs and bureau vans. The prisoner never sees sunlight. A heavy hood covers his head. When he's finally loaded into the vehicle, silence replaces the roar of engines. As they approach Florence, the landscape changes, green fades to beige, grass to gravel, and the town to a grid of fences. There are 4 prisons in this desert complex. A minimum security camp. A medium facility. A high-security penitentiary. And then, at the farthest edge, ADX Florence, the fortress. Arrival begins not with a welcome, but with a strip of identity. The inmate is taken to receiving and discharge. His chains are removed only to be replaced by others. His clothes, gone. His hair, searched. Every inch photographed, catalogued, and recorded. His fingerprints and iris scan are added to a federal database. A medical team checks vitals. A psychologist runs a short interview, asking questions that feel rehearsed. Do you hear voices? Have you ever harmed yourself? Do you understand where you are? Few answer honestly. Most just nod, knowing what honesty could cost them. He's then handed his new uniform, khaki, orange, or beige depending on classification, and issued a packet of essentials, 1 toothbrush, 1 comb, 1 bar of soap, 1 towel, and a Bible if requested. Next, he's led to Orientation Unit Z Unit, where new arrivals spend weeks in observation before being assigned to a permanent cell. The corridors here are wider, the doors heavier, and the silence thicker. Inside, guards move in pairs. Cameras follow every step. No one runs. No one raises their voice. The walls are a pale gray, smooth concrete polished to a clinical shine. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, reflecting on steel doors etched with numbers, 210, 211, 212. Each door hides a man who has vanished from the outside world. Inmates here are under step-down observation. They're monitored 24/7, their behavior logged for every word, every glance, every motion. If they comply, they might, after years, qualify for transfer to a lower security facility. But for most, ADX is forever. According to a 2014 Human Rights Watch report, inmates can spend decades in solitary without meaningful human contact. Those in Z Unit are watched even while they sleep, cameras fixed on the bed. Meals arrive through the slot at precise times. Medical checkups happen through the door. Showers are scheduled 3 times a week, each one in a steel cage, under guard supervision. Even the term yard is a formality. What they call recreation is a 10 by 20 foot concrete pen, open to the sky by a narrow grate. A former inmate told The Guardian in 2016. If you lie on your back and look up just right, you can catch a glimpse of clouds. That's how you tell what season it is. The system inside ADX is tiered: control unit, general population, and step-down units for rare cases of progress. But each tier shares the same DNA, isolation. Communication between cells is technically banned, though inmates have found ways. Some tap on pipes in Morse code. Others shout through the air vents or flush toilets to send coded signals. Every method is a rebellion, a reminder that even buried under concrete, the human voice fights to be heard. One composite inmate, referred to here as Marcus D., told his attorney during a 2017 deposition. "The hardest part ain't the walls. It's the silence. The silence gets inside your head and starts talking back. When a new inmate is placed in his permanent cell, the routine locks in immediately. The door shuts. The sound echoes, a deep, mechanical clank that vibrates through the bones. He turns and sees what will be his world. A concrete bed molded from the wall. A thin mattress. A sink-toilet combination made of stainless steel. A narrow slit window, about 4 inches wide, 2 feet long, positioned so he can see only the sky, never the horizon. That window is deliberate. Architects confirmed it was designed to prevent escape plans, and to strip the mind of distance, direction, and hope. Even letters are filtered. Mail is screened, photocopied, and read. Visits happen through thick glass, with intercoms that crackle and cut off mid-sentence. Only attorneys can visit in person, and even then, contact is forbidden. The only constant sound is the ventilation system, a low, endless hum, like a heartbeat that never stops. Over the years, some have tried to break out. None have succeeded. ADX was built with 1,400 steel doors, motion sensors, and walls reinforced with quartz aggregate. There are no blind spots, no shadows unmonitored. The few who plotted escape, like mobster Richard McNair or terrorist Zacharias Moussaoui, ended up deeper in restriction, confined to no human contact status. In those cells, even the guards avoid conversation. Everything is done by protocol. Orders spoken in code numbers, not names. The human element is erased by design. For some inmates, the first weeks are pure confusion. Their bodies still expect noise, chaos, and contact from years in other prisons. They shout to test the echoes. They pace the floor until their muscles ache. They scratch tally marks into concrete, counting hours instead of days. Then, slowly, the noise fades, not outside, but within. That's when the transformation begins. According to psychologists cited in the Washington Post, prolonged isolation at ADX leads to symptoms of SHU syndrome, anxiety, paranoia, memory loss, hallucinations, and a distorted sense of time. One inmate described hearing music that didn't exist. Another said he began talking to his reflection until it answered back. Inside ADX, madness isn't a failure, it's a side effect of design. By the time the sun sets over the Rockies, the new arrival sits in silence. The light through the narrow slit fades from gold to gray to black. The air grows colder. And as the hum of the ventilation continues, he begins to understand what guards and inmates alike have said for years. ADX Florence doesn't punish the body. It punishes the mind. The ghost routine, life, mind, and madness inside the control unit. Every day at ADX Florence begins the same way, a hollow hum in the vents, followed by the metallic clack of automated locks. For most prisons, that sound means movement. Here, it means memory. Inside the control unit, men wake up not to alarms, but to repetition, a perfect, mechanical routine that never changes. Breakfast arrives at 6:30 a.m., through the narrow steel slot known as the cuff port. The tray slides in without a word. A carton of milk, a packet of cereal, a slice of bread, sometimes scrambled eggs in a plastic cup. By 7 o'clock, it's over. The tray slides back out, replaced by silence. That silence, it's not just absence of sound. It's design. Every corridor, every cell, every vent is built to prevent voices from carrying. The only noise that travels clearly through the control unit is the hum of fluorescent lights and the slow drip of water from metal sinks. There's a name the inmates use for it, the ghost routine. Because after a while, you stop feeling alive. You just move like one. According to court filings and BOP inspection reports, ADX houses around 400 inmates, most of them confined for 22 to 24 hours daily. In the control unit, the restrictions are even tighter. This is where the Bureau of Prisons sends men who've attacked staff, orchestrated gang operations from behind bars, or escaped from other high-security facilities. But punishment here isn't a beating, it's a schedule that eats away at the mind. At 8 a.m., the intercom crackles. Guards begin their morning rounds. Keys jingle, boots echo on concrete. They peer through small, reinforced glass windows, clipboard in hand. Alive and well. The question is protocol, not conversation. The inmate nods. The guard writes something down. They move to the next cell. By 9:00, the routine repeats. Another check. Another mark on paper. The same words. Alive and well. It's the closest thing to human contact many will have all day. The cells in the control unit measure roughly 87 square feet. Every detail inside them was designed with one objective, to eliminate risk. The furniture is poured from solid concrete, a bed, a desk, a stool. The sink and toilet are stainless steel, controlled by push buttons that time out after seconds. Even the mirror is polished metal, too dull to shatter. Above the bed, a small slot allows mail to enter, but all letters are photocopied and screened first. Photographs are reduced to grayscale. No envelopes, no glue, nothing that could be turned into a weapon. The air vents are narrow and high. The windows, just 4 inches wide. Prisoners can't see each other. They can't see guards unless those guards stop in front of the glass. There are no bars, only doors, solid, gray, and soundproof. One former inmate, quoted in the Denver Post, said, "You can scream your lungs out and nobody will answer. You start to wonder if you still exist." By 10:30, lunch arrives. It's always the same, a sandwich, a cup of beans, maybe fruit if you're lucky. No silverware, only a spork. Each tray is counted before and after to prevent contraband. After eating, inmates return to pacing. The floor is exactly 5.5 steps long, 3 steps wide. Over months, the paint fades under their feet, tracing invisible paths of madness. Some inmates start talking to themselves. Others to the walls. One described hearing whispers in the pipes, voices that sound human but aren't. Psychologists call it sensory deprivation psychosis, the brain creating sound to fill the silence. By 12 o'clock noon, the cell doors lock down completely. Guards switch rotations. Paperwork is filed. The control unit becomes still again, save for the echo of air vents and footsteps overhead. Recreation is supposed to be the highlight, the 1 hour of freedom. But in the control unit, that hour is spent in a concrete enclosure, alone. Inmates step into a narrow cage, 10 feet by 20, open only to the sky. There's no grass, no equipment, no contact. Just concrete walls and air. You can tell the season by the temperature, said one former prisoner in a 2018 Vice interview. If the air burns, it's summer. If it bites, it's winter. Even during recreation, guards stand behind a mesh screen, rifles slung over their shoulders. Cameras record everything. Any sudden movement can trigger an emergency lockdown. For inmates who've been in solitary for years, that hour feels both relief and torture. Sunlight hurts their eyes, wind feels like an assault. Some refuse recreation altogether, choosing instead to stay in the only space they recognize, their cell. By 4 p.m., dinner comes early. Chili, rice, or pasta. The menu rotates weekly but tastes the same, bland, overcooked, institutional. Nutrition over pleasure. When the tray leaves, the world shrinks again. For the next 14 hours, there's nothing but light and silence. At 9 p.m., lights dim but never fully turn off. Guards call it security lighting, a faint glow so cameras can see every corner. Sleep never comes easy. Some inmates wrap shirts over their eyes. Others stare at the ceiling, following the hum of electricity like a lullaby. One guard later admitted in a PBS Frontline interview. You can see the toll. Some guys stop talking. Some stop moving. They just fade. Over months, the mind adjusts, not by healing, but by retreating. Men start counting cracks in the walls. They memorize every drip of the sink. Some invent imaginary worlds, rewatching memories like movies in their heads. Psychiatrist Dr. Craig Haney, who studied inmates at ADX, once testified in federal court that prolonged isolation causes social death. The person you were before, he said, ceases to exist. Letters from prisoners, some later released, describe the transformation vividly. One wrote, "At first, I hated the silence. Now I need it. When I hear voices again, I panic." But not all inmates surrender quietly. Some rebel, not with violence, but with small acts of defiance. Filing lawsuits. Flooding cells. Covering cameras with toothpaste. Tapping messages through walls. In 2012, several inmates joined a class action lawsuit, Bacote v. BOP, claiming that ADX's isolation violated the Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment. According to court records, some plaintiffs had been in solitary for over a decade. The case exposed harrowing details, inmates swallowing razor blades, setting fires, or cutting themselves for attention, anything to remind the system they still existed. The Bureau eventually settled, agreeing to improve mental health care and expand access to therapy. But advocates argue that real change is slow and invisible. As one lawyer told the Washington Post, "Even reforms don't reach behind those doors. Paper changes don't cure silence. The guards live their own kind of isolation. Each shift lasts 12 hours. Every procedure is scripted. They refer to inmates by number, not name. Friendliness is discouraged, empathy, dangerous." According to interviews, many staff develop symptoms of secondary trauma, nightmares, anxiety, detachment. "You can't work there and stay normal," said a former corrections officer. "The building drains you, same as them." For both sides, ADX becomes not a prison, but an ecosystem of survival, where control is currency and routine is oxygen. It's not the violence that breaks people here. It's the repetition. By midnight, the facility hums like a machine at rest. The only sounds are the soft thuds of security boots and the endless whir of ventilation. Inside each cell, a man lies awake, eyes open, staring at the faint light bleeding through his slit window. He can't see the stars, but he knows they're out there. He imagines one for each day lost, blinking faintly above the Rockies. He whispers into the dark, not to be heard, but to remember his own voice. Somewhere down the corridor, another man does the same. And though they'll never see each other, their voices meet, two ghosts passing in the silence. The breaking point, riots, protests, and the fight for humanity inside ADX. For years, ADX Florence was known for one thing above all, silence. But silence has limits, and eventually, even concrete starts to echo. By the late 2000s, reports began to surface of something the Bureau of Prisons never intended, unrest brewing within the walls of America's most escape-proof facility. Not riots in the traditional sense, no fires, no mobs, but rebellions of the mind, the kind that spread quietly through desperation. It started with letters. According to court filings from Bacote v. Federal Bureau of Prisons, 2012, a handful of inmates in the control unit began to write to advocacy groups, lawyers, and journalists. Their letters described a system that had gone beyond control, a place where isolation had become psychological collapse. One wrote, "I talk to myself all day just to remember how words sound." Another, "I cut my arm last night to see if I still bleed." Those letters made it past the screening process by accident. A guard forgot to stamp one rejected correspondence. When it reached the outside, it became evidence in a growing body of claims that ADX had lost its humanity. The Bureau denied wrongdoing, insisting that conditions were safe, secure, and constitutionally sound. But the truth was harder to contain than the inmates. To understand how the system cracked, you need to understand how it was designed to never crack at all. ADX was built with no communal areas. No cafeterias. No libraries. No workshops. Even the chaplain prays through a slot. The philosophy was control through isolation, the belief that eliminating human contact would eliminate conflict. For years, it worked. No escapes. No riots. Barely any noise. But over time, the inmates learned to turn silence into signal. They started communicating through toilet codes, flushing patterns that echoed through pipes. Others tapped through vents or wrote messages in soap on mirrors for the next man to occupy the cell. Slowly, alliances formed. Not gangs, the system prevented that, but shared resistance. One anonymous inmate, cited in an ACLU report, described how they began to synchronize acts of defiance. We'd all cover our cameras at once. All refuse meals at once. They couldn't punish all of us. The staff called it group disruption. The inmates called it reminding them we exist. The first major breaking point came in 2004, a protest in the special security unit known as Derange. According to Bureau internal memoranda later obtained by reporters, a small group of inmates refused to return trays and began shouting through the doors in unison, demanding better medical care and outdoor time. The standoff lasted 3 days. Guards used pepper spray through food slots and extraction teams in riot gear to subdue them. No one escaped. But something changed, the myth of perfect control cracked. Reports of self-harm surged afterward. Psychologists warned that the facility's mental health unit was understaffed, and that prisoners were decompensating, losing basic cognitive function due to sensory deprivation. The administration doubled down. More restrictions. Less recreation. Mail slowed. Isolation deepened. The prison didn't quiet down, it went hollow. By 2011, the mental health crisis had become impossible to hide. A bureau psychologist, Dr. Thomas Silverstein, no relation to the inmate with the same name, submitted an internal memo warning that prolonged solitary confinement was producing irreversible psychological damage. He wrote, "We are manufacturing psychosis." The memo was never meant to be public. But during discovery in the Bacote lawsuit, it leaked, and became a national headline. News outlets from The Guardian to 60 Minutes began investigating. Former staff spoke off-record about suicide attempts, self-mutilation, and cell extractions gone wrong. One former guard described scraping blood off walls every other week. Human rights groups called ADX a clean torture chamber. Even the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture condemned its conditions in 2014, stating that solitary confinement beyond 15 days amounted to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. The U.S. government rejected the accusation. But cracks kept spreading. Then came the 2012 hunger strike. It began quietly. One inmate in the general population unit refused meals, taping a note to his door that read, "We are dying in silence." Within days, others followed. By the end of the week, over 20 inmates had joined. They weren't asking for release, only for contact, books, letters, sunlight, therapy. The Bureau's official response was swift, force-feeding through nasal tubes, as documented in medical logs later cited by the Washington Post. The strike ended after 3 weeks. The participants were dispersed to different ranges. But word had already escaped the walls. Public pressure mounted. Advocates demanded reform. And for the first time in its history, ADX Florence faced oversight from outside eyes. Reform came slow, but it came. In 2015, following the settlement of Bacote v. Bacote, the Bureau announced a new step-down program, a four-phase system allowing inmates to gradually earn privileges and transition toward lower security facilities. They could, in theory, move from 23-hour lockdown to limited interaction with others, and eventually to small group programs. Psychologists were added. Mental health screenings expanded. Inmates could receive controlled recreation, 2 men in a shared pen under supervision. For the first time in decades, some prisoners saw another human being face to face. But even that had rules: no touching, no whispering, no eye contact longer than 5 seconds. Still, the system couldn't erase the damage already done. A 2019 Amnesty International report found that over half of ADX's population had spent more than a decade in isolation. Some had been there since the prison's opening in 1994. Many showed permanent psychological scars, hallucinations, self-harm, emotional flatlining. One anonymous psychiatrist, after interviewing several inmates, said, "These men don't dream of freedom. They dream of sound." In some cells, men would hum or tap just to remind themselves they were still alive. Others refused therapy, convinced that silence was safer than memory. One inmate reportedly told his caseworker, "I'm scared to leave the cell. Out there feels less real." By the late 2010s, the Bureau of Prisons began to shift language. Administrative control became secure management. The word solitary disappeared from official documents, replaced with bureaucratic phrasing like single-occupant confinement. But the walls never changed. The silence never changed. The men didn't forget. Among them were notorious figures, cartel bosses, terrorists, spies, but also those who had simply become lost in the system. According to investigative journalists from ProPublica and the Marshall Project, some inmates had been transferred to ADX for minor infractions like possessing contraband or verbal aggression. Once inside, it was almost impossible to get out. For a few, the breaking point came not from anger, but from hopelessness. Between 1999 and 2020, at least 7 suicides were officially recorded. Unofficial accounts suggest more. Most involved men with documented mental illness. Each time, the Bureau launched an internal review. Each time, procedures were updated. Yet each time, the next man found the same end. One guard described it best. ADX doesn't explode. It implodes. You don't see the violence, you feel the aftermath. Even after reforms, the rhythm of the prison stayed the same. The ghost routine continued. Only now, the ghosts knew they were being watched. By 2023, new leadership within the Bureau promised further oversight, mental health expansion, re-entry programs, and partnerships with independent monitors. Still, advocacy groups argue that no reform can undo decades of isolation's psychological cost. And while the world outside debates rehabilitation versus retribution, the men inside ADX still live by the same mantra whispered through the vents. The body's in Florence. The mind's already gone. Disclaimer. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. All information is drawn from verified sources including Bureau of Prisons records, federal lawsuits such as Bacote v. Bacote, reports by The Washington Post, Vice, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. Some names and events have been adapted for narrative clarity and privacy. The exit door, redemption, release, and the shadow that never leaves. Leaving ADX Florence is not like walking out of an ordinary prison. There are no farewells, no family waiting behind a gate, no handshake from a warden. For most men, leaving doesn't mean freedom. It means transfer, to another facility, another cage, another stage of confinement. And for the few who do step beyond those concrete walls as free men, the outside world is no longer the one they remember. Because ADX doesn't just lock up the body. It reshapes the mind, quietly, permanently. According to Bureau of Prisons records, only a fraction of ADX inmates ever graduate from its step-down program, the system created after the Bacote v. Bacote settlement to reintroduce controlled social contact. It's a four-phase process. Control unit, total isolation. Intermediate, monitored conversation through glass barriers. Transitional, small group meals and shared recreation cages. Pre-transfer, limited phone calls, supervised visits, and access to educational materials. Each phase takes years. A single argument, rule violation, or outburst can reset the clock to zero. Progress is measured not by rehabilitation, but by compliance. Inmate Jr., a composite drawn from verified case files and media reports, entered ADX in the late 1990s after multiple violent incidents in another federal prison. For nearly 15 years, he lived under the same light, in the same cell, staring at the same slit of sky. Then, in 2016, he was approved for step-down Phase 3, small group interaction. It was the first time he'd seen another inmate in over a decade. He later told his caseworker, "I forgot how to talk to people. I forgot when to blink." During one session, he asked another prisoner what year it was. The man hesitated, unsure himself. That's what time becomes in ADX, not a straight line, but a circle. Those who reach Phase 4 are transferred to lower security penitentiaries like USP Marion or USP Terre Haute. But the adjustment is brutal. Guards report that many ADX graduates walk differently, slower, suspicious, eyes darting to corners. They flinch at human contact. A correctional officer at Marion once described them to the Marshall Project as ghosts who forgot how to live. He said, "They stand in the yard and don't move. You talk to them, and they stare through you like you're another wall." Some never adapt. After decades in near-total silence, the noise of ordinary prisons, voices, music, arguments, becomes overwhelming. A few request to return to isolation. For those who eventually leave the Bureau's custody entirely, the outside world is an alien planet. Psychologists who've interviewed former ADX inmates say many suffer from chronic hypervigilance, anxiety, and sensory disorientation. One described sunlight as too bright to believe. Another said supermarkets triggered panic, too much color, too much choice. A 2021 Human Rights Watch study documented several former ADX prisoners who struggled to re-enter society, many ending up back in custody within months, not from violence, but from confusion, mental illness, or homelessness. One wrote in his journal, "Freedom feels like noise. I miss the quiet I used to hate." And yet, a handful found redemption, fragments of light in an endless gray. Through the step-down literacy program launched in 2018, some inmates began studying law, theology, and writing. A few earned degrees via correspondence courses, funded by nonprofit organizations. One of them, a former gang member convicted of racketeering, started mentoring others through letters. His essays on surviving silence were later published anonymously in a criminal justice reform journal. In one, he wrote, "ADX didn't kill me. It taught me how small freedom can be, and how much it matters anyway." For advocates and reformers, stories like his are rare victories, proof that even inside the tightest cage, humanity can flicker. The Bureau of Prisons insists ADX remains essential, a deterrent for the most violent and manipulative offenders. Officials cite statistics, no successful escapes, no major riots, and improved staff safety. But critics argue the price is moral erosion, a system that punishes not just crimes, but consciousness itself. As one former warden confessed to the New York Times, "ADX works. But the question is, at what cost to our soul?" In 2022, the U.S. Department of Justice commissioned a quiet internal review of long-term solitary confinement practices across the federal system. The resulting report, only partially released, acknowledged significant psychological risks and recommended reducing isolation to less than 15 consecutive days. But reform inside supermax walls moves slower than anywhere else. ADX remains, in its own way, unchanged, silent, watchful, and absolute. At sunset, Florence looks almost peaceful. The mountains cast long shadows across the desert plain. From above, you'd never guess what lies within those angles of concrete and steel, hundreds of men, each living in their own private eternity. Every night, as the lights dim and the hum of ventilation fills the air, the same ritual unfolds, men lying on concrete beds, staring through 4-inch windows, seeing the same sliver of sky. Some pray. Some whisper. Some just count the seconds until the next day begins, the next ghost routine. Because even for those who leave, part of them never does. The silence of ADX follows, into dreams, into conversations, into every empty room. It's not just a prison anymore. It's a shadow that never leaves. Disclaimer. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. All information is drawn from verified public sources including Bureau of Prisons records, Department of Justice reports, court filings, and investigative journalism from outlets such as the New York Times, the Marshall Project, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International. Some names and minor details have been modified for privacy and narrative clarity.